Hello, everyone. My name is Anna Bibikova. I'm a head of marketing here at Zenphi, and I'm your host for today. Super excited for this opportunity to host the webinar Best Practices for Offboarding in Google Workspace on behalf of Zenphi team. So let me share with you some first preliminary notes and about housekeeping. This session is going to be recorded. Check your inbox in a couple of days after the webinar is over in case you're part of our mailing list. If you're not, you're always welcome to check out our YouTube channel where you can find tons of useful content, including automation of user offboarding in Google Workspace. Also encouraged to use the Handouts tab to download assets that you might find useful for this session. And of course, feel free to ask questions in the question section of chat at the bottom of your screen. In case we don't have any time left for Q&A session, I'll make sure that me or someone from our team answer your questions accordingly or reach out to you via email with the relevant answers. So let's get started. First of all, I would like to share with you some absolutely mind-blowing data statistics that I came upon while getting ready for the webinar. So here it is. A couple of years ago, Mira, cybersecurity company you probably heard of, ran a research asking employees all over the world, have they ever taken documents from their previous employer? In other words, have they ever misused data from the company they have just left? And the results were absolutely eye-opening. About 45% of employees, the number is a little bit less for larger enterprises, but about 45% of employees have actually misused documents or data from their previous employers. Another revealing fact is that over 25% of employers admit that their company's reputation had been damaged due to ineffective offboarding process. This data was collected by Beyond Identity Group in the report they released a little bit less than a year ago. These data, among other factors, let us in Zenphi start this session and host this webinar, trying to figure out what is the reason for companies consistently overlooking the threat that improper offboarding processes can actually pose. We all know that Google Workspace is an incredibly secure environment, offering excellent tools for sharing information, managing access, and organizing digital workspace. However, the platform's robust capabilities also mean that the responsibility of data security often falls heavily on people using it. So it's not about tech, it's about people. One scenario, unfortunately, where the human factor can become a significant risk is during the offboarding of departing employees, as we have all vividly seen according to the research and reports presented above. Despite of the fact that this risk is very real, the scenario where employees still have access to data of their ex-employers repeats itself over and over again. Even though Google Workspace is secure, former employees can still access companies' data if the offboarding process isn't handled correctly. So let's get started. Our expert today, super excited to present him, Ben King, a former Google employee and now a renowned consultant, Google Workspace Security Best Practices. Let's connect Ben and listen to the insights he's eager to share with us today. Hello, Ben. Super excited to have you today, and thank you for joining our session on offboarding.
Thanks, Anna. Super excited to be talking about it. It's such an important topic, and I don't think it gets the attention and time that it probably deserves, especially in the current age of cyber attacks and hacking that's proliferating.
Yeah, so we're basically trying to understand how important this topic is. And from your experience, what are the most common mistakes companies make when offboarding employees, particularly in Google Workspace environments? Well, we all know that Google Workspace is very secure, and the company itself invests a lot of resources to make it even better and more secure for everyone. But still, it doesn't eliminate the human factor, right? So in your experience, what are the common pitfalls in this respect?
Yeah, definitely. And I think most people understand it's pretty clear that you need to cut off employees' access to email. So as someone leaves the company, they turn off their access to Gmail. But then there's a lot of people that are using a multitude of software as a service solutions. So I'm going to pick on things like Zoom, Slack. Maybe there's something that some other customers shared with you that's in Dropbox, and you still have access to that with an email address and password. And if you look at Slack, the single sign-on tier is $20 per user per month. So most people aren't paying for that because they don't need it. So they forget to manually go and disable those people in Slack or in Zoom. So someone's left your company, and then 6 months later you're in Slack and you try to message someone else, and you're like, oh, what's Ben still doing in there? And Ben's had access to your entire company's chat history for however long that is. At Aviato, we have a few customers that use Slack, so we've kind of met them where they are. I think there's only 3 or 4 users that are provisioned. But for us, we've still got this risk that if we forget to disable one of those users in Slack a month after they join, especially if it's a bad leaver, they could potentially go in there and tell our client to do whatever they wanted. So there's a massive risk there for companies that I don't think's appreciated.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So I have the question that a little bit maybe philosophical one. I remember the first time I heard about companies being so absent-minded, let's put it mildly, about the offboarding process. When the founder of Nira, one of the cybersecurity firms on Twitter, it was Twitter back then, now it's X platform, Hidden Shop, he just explained how they came up with an idea to start up the company, that they basically were talking during the presentation with one of the investors, and they showed one of the MVP that they were building that basically tracked the documentation that ex-employees still had access to on the company's servers. And they were shocked, everyone in the room were shocked how many ex-employees still had access to company's sensitive data. And it was, I would say, maybe 15 years ago. So from your experience, because you consult a lot of companies now on cybersecurity, especially in Google Workspace, from your experience, has something changed in this area, in the attitude of companies regarding revoking access in time to ex-employees? And if it hasn't, what is the reason for that? Why companies completely overlook the dangers, the threats that this kind of attitude presents?
Yeah, it's a great question, Anna. I think it comes back to the size of the company. Some of the larger, like ASX listed companies that we're dealing with, have chief information security officers and multiple people that go and look at this. And when they onboard any vendor, they go through a fairly strict process to make sure they're using single sign-on and they have a single source of truth. And if there's a vendor that doesn't support that, they create systems and they have tools very similar to Zenphi that they're happy to spend very, very large sums of money on to give them that kind of security, especially the banks and places like that that are very paranoid. But then I think as you start to come down into the mid-tier and the smaller businesses, it's not something that you think about. These people might have like one cybersecurity person, maybe none. And that is probably one of the biggest risks, because most of the security we have now, if you've got multi-factor authentication turned on, is pretty strong. Like, it's very hard to get around, but then you're giving employees access, forgetting to disable them, and then that's where we're getting these risks of data exfiltration. And I saw the post you shared promoting this is there's huge percentages of people, I can't remember the exact number off the top of my head, that forget to disable employees, and it was like 80% of people have taken employees' documents and then used them at a new employer, which is kind of shocking as well, to be honest.
Yeah, the craziest part that people don't hesitate to admit it, right? They consider it totally normal to take data from their ex-employer and then use it elsewhere. So how important do you think, or let's put it this way, what do you think is, again, it's a question that you might be the best person to answer as a consultant. So what is the best way to approach the change of the attitude? How would someone, for example, a cybersecurity specialist or a Google Workspace admin, who is, as you mentioned, just one person within the huge company, or maybe someone who's got a team of 2-3 other people, how do they start changing their attitude? How do they implement change within the company so that leadership also start treating this process as one of the most important ones?
I think finding those documents. So as you said, there's a lot of documents within companies, and people have, just out of convenience, they've shared it to their Gmail so they could work on it on the weekend on a different computer. And they've left the company and nothing around that's been tidied up, and there's no real policies. So if you go looking through Google Drive and looking at stuff that's been shared, and there's reports you can get in there, you can see these ex-employees who, they weren't being malicious, but they just shared something to their Gmail account because it was easier to work on. And that person might have left the company a long time ago, and they still have full access to that document. It might be something that you've been updating. It might be something that's no longer relevant. But that kind of stuff, if you're showing that to executives and leadership, they're going to be like, how do we stop this? This is obviously a problem. We've seen that it's happened to us. And you've got the legislation now around data leaks. Like, that is a data leak. Like, you should be, if you found that employee's been accessing that and it has your customers' data in it, you need to let your customers know, or you get fined per customer, which is obviously a fairly expensive exercise, both financially and from a reputation perspective as well.
Yeah. So would you think that running audits, starting to run them consistently, is a good way to begin changing the attitudes towards this problem?
Yeah, definitely. If you walk into a boardroom and put up a slide that shows documents that have been shared to Gmail of people who no longer work in the company, and all of those boards, they're around governance and risk and minimizing that risk to the company, they're gonna sit up in their chairs and take notice of what you say next, which is probably to get a tool that manages these employee offboarding and removes those permissions and deletes all those Slack accounts and Zoom accounts and everything else that you have running.
Okay, yeah, that makes total sense. Okay, so in your opinion, as an expert in cybersecurity, especially in Google Workspace, what should be the pillars of the best practices of the right attitude towards employee offboarding process? What should be the must-haves? I would say the most important aspects. Like, if we put it in a employee offboarding checklist, what would you put on this list?
Yeah, well, I'd probably start with the onboarding, because if your onboarding is really tight, the offboarding is going to be much easier. So when people join, having a look at all the tools you use and making sure that there is a single place where that person is enabled. If they've signed up with Google Workspace and they get an email and they go and sign up to multiple other tools, each one of those is a risk and an attack vector. So that's kind of key. And even if it's not possible, like, there's some software as a service solution out there that are really beneficial to businesses, but they don't have single sign-on integrated. And maybe that's because they're new, or it's in the premium enterprise tier, which is like 10x the cost of the one that you're using, and you just can't justify that cost. So tracking those things as well, so that if you do get people offboarding, using a tool like Zenphi that can go through and disable all of these other accounts in other places is what's needed. But you need to kind of have visibility of it first, which I think you get in the onboarding phase as well. And the other thing I don't think we've touched on is compliance. So a lot of businesses working with larger companies are required to have ISO 27001 or SOC 2, mainly for American companies, or they're operating in Europe. And you touched on GDPR there as well. So a lot of the regulations and rules in different regions and those compliance frameworks require you to have this. So we use Vanta in our organization to track all of the vendors that we have. And if someone leaves the company, it would actually go and say, you haven't disabled them somewhere else, but it doesn't track all of the different tools that we have. It tracks most of them, I'd say. So there's still a gap there, even for our organization. One of the biggest ones is Xero. Xero doesn't have single sign-on. Most Australian businesses are using it. Do they have a process to offboard maybe only a few people, like accountants and bookkeepers in the organization, when they leave? Probably not. It's probably forgotten about.
Okay, yeah, that's right. You touched on the aspects of tracking, for example, the onboarding process, starting from the very beginning. So how do you onboard a person, then basically backtracking and revoking access? So I understand how these things can be done when we are talking about company of 10, 15 employees, maybe 50 max. In terms of when obviously the business starts scaling and growing and the number of employees grows considerably. So what automations maybe, or are there any internal solutions that Google Workspace provides that can help Google admins to implement all these changes and make sure that all the processes, the offboarding and onboarding simultaneously, that they are run consistently and eliminate human error.
Look, I think Google has amazing technology, but they're not good at selling solutions. Like companies like Salesforce, I don't really rate the technology, but they sell solutions. Google is like, here are all these tools and you can use them to do all this stuff, but you have to figure out how to connect them together. And I think like Zenphi is the glue that joins some of these things. So when you are onboarding people, you don't have to get software engineers. You can use Zenphi to kind of create that onboarding flow. And even if you're tracking things in Sheets or just writing stuff to Sheets, it's way better than what a lot of companies are doing. And I think you'll find this as well, is like the cyber team looks at all the tools. The cyber team knows, they're like, oh, we secured Google Cloud because it's linked to Google Workspace, but Xero, like I mentioned before, it's only owned by 2 or 3 people, and the cyber team probably don't know about it. There's probably tons of stuff in there that you really don't want leaked, and people can do quite a lot of damage with that. So I think there's so many tools in different organizations, and Xero is one that Vanta hasn't picked up on that we're using for our accounting, and I'm sure that probably half the Australian businesses are using it as well.
Yeah, thank you so much for shout out. I really appreciate that. I also believe that Zenphi is an amazing tool. And you're absolutely right. It's an all maybe question between great product and great marketing. In many cases, they don't coexist. What do you think we haven't covered? What do you think is important to mention for companies to start implementing these best practices and start changing attitudes in their routine way how they treat this process?
Yeah, I think it's like financial advice. Like people say you should save a certain percentage of your money. Nobody does it until it's automated. So when money goes into your account, if something automatically puts money into a savings account, you're not going to save money. And I think it's the same with this kind of stuff. Unless you've got tools set up that do it for you and don't require any time, it's just not going to get done. So having that kind of stuff in place is going to be key. We don't want anyone else in the newspaper like Medibank and Optus were. So it really needs to be taken care of and looked at. And a lot of people, it's always on their to-do list. And even when they build a process, it's a manual process, and then like they don't have time to do it, so they'll do it next week and then they forget about it. So it really needs to be automated to be done properly.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like building habits, right? Sometimes until you install the application, you never start jogging or do any exercises.
Exactly.
Yeah, thank you so much, Ben. Can you just a little bit cover the aspects what your company can help with? What are the most important topics you in your practice help other companies with, and how can people find you?
Yeah, sure. So aviato.consulting is the website. You can also find me on LinkedIn, or find us on LinkedIn. We are mainly ex-Google employees who started a Google Cloud professional services company. A lot of the work is around data. Google Cloud is obviously well known for its data, but we also do Google Workspace, so Google Sheets, Docs, Google Mail, all of those cool things. And then there's other no-code solutions in there where Zenphi also kind of plugs in, like AppSheet, where you've got people in non-technical roles who are building apps to automate some of their processes. And obviously, yeah, Zenphi plays quite well in making a lot of those linking of tools much easier. So we kind of cover just Google Cloud at this stage, not looking to do the other clouds.
Okay, thank you so much, Ben, and have a lovely day. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Anna. Bye.
Now, before we move, thank you so much, Ben, once again. Before we move on to the next speaker, I would like to take a few moments to introduce a company that Ben mentioned a couple of times, and that actually is hosting the webinar for you today. In case you don't know what Zenphi is, let me introduce Zenphi to you. Zenphi is a dedicated no-code process automation platform for Google Workspace users. It allows to automate processes like employee onboarding, provisioning, offboarding, access approvals, and so much more with just a few drags and drops. And what makes Zenphi really stand out is the fact that our platform allows users to automate processes end-to-end, not just 1 or 2 tasks, but everything, starting from the task assignment to the communication with your colleagues, everything that you need to actually make the process happen and the company to get the reliable result. I'm also super excited to mention that among our customers, we have trusted and renowned organizations like New York City Department of Education, Emerson College, SOCAR, Academics Enterprise Trust, located in London, and so many more companies. If you want to learn more, our success stories, don't hesitate to reach out and we'll share with you everything we have achieved helping our customers to automate their processes. And now let's move on to our next speaker, Fernanda Lopez. Fernanda is Customer Success Engineer at Zenphi. She's been instrumental in helping hundreds of companies automate their processes, including onboarding process, by the way, to ensure the data security remains intact. Fernanda is essentially the ambassador of Google Workspace best practices in this field. So Fernanda, the spotlight on the stage goes to her now. Let me connect Fernanda to our webinar session.
Hi, my name is Fernanda, and today we're going to be going over how you can automate a flow to be able to have an offboarding process for your workspace. We're going to be creating a flow and a dashboard, so let's go ahead and jump in. The first step to any Zenphi flow is to configure your trigger, which in Zenphi is the action that's going to start your flow. For this example, we have chosen to use the Google Form trigger, meaning it's going to start the flow whenever you receive a Google Form response. To be able to set this up, all you have to do is create a new connection. So you have to click on this plus icon to be able to create a new connection, and then you're going to be able to select your Google Form using this button here. This is going to be the form that I'll be using for the example. So there's a couple questions, for example, the email of the user we want to suspend, the detailed reason for their suspension, when they want to suspend, and I've added a different section. If they want to select a different date, then they're able to select the date here. Make sure in the settings to enable to collect the email addresses. That way we're able to see who filled out the form. Now we're going to jump into the actions or the different steps. So the first one that we have here is called Look Up User Information. What this allows us to do is to retrieve important information for the user, for example, if they're admins, their name, their primary email, etc. So what we're going to do is first look up the user that they want to suspend. So once again, we're going to click on Create New Connection. This connection can be private or shared. This is going to grant Zenphi permission to be able to access your Google directory. After that, we have to indicate the email of the user that we want to look up, in this case, the user that we want to suspend. So by clicking on this chain icon, this is called a token picker, we can go ahead and go to our trigger. And since that's one of our questions, we can add that token here. And we're going to do the same thing, except this time with the requester. Now here, this next action is called Format Date Time. This is going to be used to be able to format a certain date in a specific way. So here I'm just formatting the time of submission since I want to show it in this format. And now depending on what date they chose to suspend, either immediately or a separate date, we have to go ahead and set that value in one of our variables. So I've gone ahead and created a variable called suspension date, which is a date time variable. So here what I've gone ahead and created is an if condition. So for this action, you can add different clauses to decide which direction the flow should take. So if we click here on the dial, it's going to follow the true branch when would you like to suspend the user is equal to immediately. So in this case, if they want to suspend the user as soon as possible, it would follow the true branch. If not, it would follow the false branch. So what we're going to do is, if it follows a true branch, we're going to get today's date by using the current date time action. Again, select the culture, time zone. You can choose a different format. There's even an option to create a custom format. And then afterward, for both branches, what we're going to do is set that value. So this action is called set variable. What we're going to do is find the variable from the dropdown. And for the other one, here we would get the response from the question where they give us the date. After that, we now have the value for the suspension date set. And then I'm going to go ahead and add that to our table. So I've previously created a table called user suspension requests. So this table is going to be the following. Let me go ahead and open it. Okay, so here we have our table. There's a couple different columns, when it was requested. So we have 5 different columns: when they're going to be suspended, the requester email, the user who requested to suspend, and then the status of the request. So what I'm going to do is add them to the table. Here you can select which fields you want to add. In this case, I've selected all of them. And what I'm going to do is add the information to each column. So here, when it was requested, the status is review pending, and then the requested suspension date would come from our format date time. So now that we have that, what we're going to do is create an audit trail document that's going to serve to be able to store the information from the request that was made. So I'm going to go ahead and show the document that I'll be using for the example. So we have a section for the user information, the suspension details, and the reason for suspension. Wherever you want to replace information, make sure you set it inside of 2 curly brackets. That way we're able to replace that information with placeholders. So to do that, we're going to use a generate document using template action. We're going to set up a connection to our Google Drive. Once again, if we click on the Google Drive icon, we can select the template that we're going to be using, and then we can select the folder and the name that we want to give to the file. And if you've added any placeholders like I have, if you click on load placeholders, they will all pop up here and you can fill them in using the token picker. So for example, the full name, username, user position, all of that would come from the lookup user action that we had. So once we fill all of this in, what we're going to do is look up the suspended users manager, since we do want to get their approval for their suspension. Now there is the option that the manager submitted the request. So to be able to check that, what we're going to do is use an if condition. So for the clause, what we're going to do is add when the primary email for the user's manager is equal to the primary email of the requester, then we're not going to send it for their approval since they're the ones that submitted it. So we're going to go ahead and start with the true branch, and then we'll follow back the false branch since that one's a bit longer. So if the manager was one that submitted the request, what we're going to do is update the status in our Zenphi table. So this action is called update record. And the only thing I'm going to update is the status to suspension approved. Now in the false branch, we have to send it to their manager for approval. So this action, it's very handy. It's called assign task. You can update the name, the description, you can add different outcomes, date, the reason for suspension, and they're able to approve or reject. You can add reminders, expiry, etc. Now, they obviously have the option to approve or reject. So if they approve, what we're going to do is follow the true branch. To be able to set that, what I did was add the clause when the response outcome is equal to approve, it's going to follow the true branch. To do that, by clicking on the token picker, going to the task, we have the response outcome here, so you can select that token. If they approve, what we're going to do is same as we did in the other branch, change the status to suspension approved using the update record action. However, if they didn't approve, what we're going to do is notify the requester, notify IT. So to do that, we're going to send them an email using send email by Gmail. You can add copies, you can add a sender display name subject. So here you can just customize the email in whichever way you want. Feel free to use the token picker to be able to add valuable information. And we're going to do the same thing with the requester, but in this case, we're sending it to the requester's primary email instead. And I would attach the PDF file for the audit trail document. And then lastly, what we're going to do is update the record. Once again, select the table, the record ID, and this time the status is going to be suspension rejected. And we're going to go ahead and terminate the flow. So now continuing on what would happen if either the manager approves or if the manager sent the request, what we have to do is notify IT that they will be suspended. So we're going to use the email action once again, send email with Gmail, and then we have to see if they're going to be suspended immediately or if we have to wait until a certain day. So what I'm going to do is retrieve the current date and time. That way we know what day it is. And then what we have to do is, using an if condition, we're going to see if they will be suspended on a future date. So we're going to click on the dials. And what I've set here is when the date that the user should be suspended, which is one of the questions from the trigger. this one, when it's greater than the current date and time, we're going to follow the true branch. And since we're going to have to wait a couple days, what we're going to do is pause our flow using the pause action. There's different modes. We're going to wait until a specific time. So we're going to go ahead and resume the flow whenever the date that they selected has arrived. And then after that, what we're going to do is go ahead and get the current date and time. So since we've paused the flow, or if it's the same day that they have to be suspended, it's going to be the same as the current date and time. So I'm going to go ahead and select a format. As you can see, I'm always using the same format so that we have a cohesive date going on in the table. I'm going to go ahead and generate a new password for the user. So this action is called generate password. You can change the length. You can choose to include uppercase, numbers, special characters, etc. And I'm going to go ahead and update their recovery information as well. It's very important we do that since we don't want them to be able to change their password once again using this information. And now we're going to go ahead and sign out the user. This action is called sign out user. So once you set up your connection, you have to just indicate the email of the user that we're going to sign out. In this case, the suspended user. And before we suspend them, we want to make sure that they're not sharing any files that they shouldn't be sharing. So we're going to go ahead and list the user's externally shared files. So using list user shared files, you're going to set up your connection. Here we're going to add their email once again. Sharing type, anything being shared with link, we want to make sure we remove. Where we want to search, only in My Drive. And you can search for files and folders, or only files or only folders. Exclude trash items, yes. And what we're going to do is make a copy of the template that we're going to be using to be able to store their externally shared files. So this is what the Google Sheet would look like. We have a column for the ID, the file name, the view link, and the status. It can either be shared with link or sharing removed. So here I've added the file as the template, so you can click on the Google Drive icon to select the Google Sheet. Destination folder would be where you want to save it. So once again, if you click here, you can select any folder from your drive, and then you can add a name. Here I've added their email so we know who it belongs to. And then what we're going to do is loop through each file and folder that they're sharing and see which ones are being shared externally with link. Add those files to the Google Sheet using the add row action. So set up your connection once again, select the file, and then for the status, changing it to shared with link. We'll go ahead and update the status once the sharing has been disabled. Then for each file, we're also going to list their permissions using the list permissions action. So you can get the file ID using the token picker. So if we open up the for each loop, it will be a suggestion here. And then we're going to go ahead and delete the sharing. And then what we're going to do is update the status to sharing removed. This action is called update row. So what we have to do is set up our connection, select the file ID, and then the only column I'm going to update is column D. I'm going to change it to sharing removed. So after this, what we have done is checked which files they're sharing externally. We've gone ahead and removed that sharing. So now what we're going to do is change the status in our Zenphi table to update record. And we're going to go ahead and export the Google Sheet that we just filled out into PDF. We're going to use the export to PDF action. So after you set up your connection, select the file, select where you want to save the file, and you can also choose a name for the file. And we're going to go ahead and merge that PDF with the previously created audit trail. So to do that, we're going to use the merge documents action. Here you can use the token pickers to be able to select which documents you want to merge. Just make sure you separate them by comma. You can add a password if you want to make the document protected. And you can also change the file name. After that, we're going to save a copy of this merged document inside of our drive. So using the save file drive action. And now what we're going to do is add the user to a suspended group. So we've gone ahead and created a group called suspended users. So we're going to go ahead and add the user to this group. So this action is called add to group. Here you would add your group key, the member's email address, the member's role, and you can choose which emails they would receive if they receive any. And then last but not least, we're going to notify HR and IT. Basically notifying them that they have been suspended as of today's date, and we're going to go ahead and attach the merged PDF. So we're going to go ahead and save and publish our flow. Once your flow is published, whenever a response is submitted, it'll automatically run. So what we're going to do is fill out a form. So I'm going to go ahead and use this email. We're going to go ahead and fill out the form. So give me 1 second to be able to fill it out.
Unfortunately, we don't have too much time left for the questions, question and answer sessions, but I'm tracking all the questions being asked in the chat. And I hope Fernanda will be able to answer 2 of them. I selected 2 from Lana and Oleg, so probably because they resonate with me so much. As personally, as a marketing professional, I automated a couple of workflows, obviously, maybe a little bit more than a couple. But the complexity of the flow that Fernanda just built, it's completely mind-blowing. So I hope Fernanda would be able to enlighten us on the subject, if it's a standard flow that should be used all the time, or if Google admins can actually create something customized, maybe simpler, maybe more complex, based on their specific use case, or if Zenphi provides just hard-coded templates that no one can change. So this is something that Lana is asking about. We also have another question on, well, the question is very simple. Why do we need to add an initiator email in the beginning? So this is our questions. If you heard some of them, Fernanda, it would be great if you answer. If you're not, if you haven't heard them, I will just go ahead and repeat them after you finish the test run.
Okay, so I'll go ahead and answer them while I submit the form. So for the first question, yes, Zenphi is very customizable. You can add or remove as many steps as you need to your process. If you maybe don't want to add them to a group, or you don't want to add their shared files, you don't have to add that. That's the beauty of Zenphi. You can add or remove as many steps as you want to your flow process. So if your flow is very simple or very complex, you can do it all here. And answering the second question, the reason we want to make sure we add the initiator email is because we want to be able to notify the person who is going to approve or reject. If they're going to be suspended, who sent in the request. We want to have this for security reasons, to be able to keep track of who's submitting the request. So now that we have those answered, we're going to click on Start. As you can see, it's running through the different steps. It's added them to the table. So if we refresh the table, we can see that they've been added, and it says review pending. Okay, so here we can see that it was sent to the manager to approve. So let's go ahead and see that email. And this is what the email would look like. So what we're going to do is click on approve or reject. So I'm going to go ahead and click on approve. As we can see here, it has changed it to suspension approved. And it's gone through the different steps. Now it's suspended the user. The status has been changed to user suspended. So if we refresh the table, we can see that now the status is suspended. And it's notified HR and IT. So let's go ahead and open up that email. This is the email. As we can see here, it has their full name, the date, and I've indicated that there's an audit trail and externally shared files attached. So we open up the PDF. Here we have the first document. It says when it was submitted, at what time, by who, when they want to be suspended, and the reason. And then down at the bottom, we can see that they have no externally shared files, so there's nothing on the sheet. And that would be everything. We can also see that they were added to the group. And thank you so much for watching. If you have any questions, you can always let us know on our YouTube channel. We post different tutorials, or you can leave them down in the comments of this webinar.
Thank you, Fernanda, once again. And thank you, everyone, for joining us today and participating in this important discussion on securing your Google Workspace during employee offboarding. We've covered the critical risks associated with the improper offboarding and steps you can take to protect your company's data. Also, we discussed how automation can help you all along to ensure everything is run smoothly and to streamline your automation within the company. As we've seen, even the most secure digital environments like Google Workspace are only as strong as the processes we put in place to manage them. Proper offboarding isn't just a best practice. It's a necessity for safeguarding your company's valuable information and maintaining trust within your organization. I would also like to extend special thanks to our expert speakers for today, Banking and Fernanda Lopez, for sharing their insights and practical advice. Before we close, I encourage you all to connect with Ben and Fernanda on LinkedIn and follow the insightful content they consistently share. You can also follow our Zenphi account on social media, especially YouTube, where we post tons of useful tutorials and tips, most of them actually being recorded by Fernanda here. You'll receive an email shortly where included all the useful links to Fernanda and Ben's social media profile and, of course, our YouTube channel. Thank you very much and see you at the next session.